1 Samuel chapter 30. It says that David and his men reached Ziklag on the third day. Now the Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. They had attacked Ziklag and burned it and taken captain the women and everything else in it, both the young and the old. They killed none of them but carried them off as they went on their way. Basically, pirates and raiders went to Ziklag and burned down David's city to the ground, if you will, and took all the women and children and all of their plunder. And when David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. Basically, they went away to go on a mission, and while they were on a mission, pirates raided their village. That's essentially what took place. They get back and they see that everything's burned to the ground, and they're crying and they're weeping and they're hurting. And it said they cried until they had no strength left to weep. David's two wives had been captured, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel, who we learned about earlier in the chapters. It said David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters, but David found strength in the Lord his God. Basically, everyone was so mad at what happened because they had gone out on this mission and their families were taken that they talked about killing their leader. I don't know if things have ever gone bad at work or ever gone bad in a situation and you got so mad that you guys were just like, man, fire the CEO, fire this leader. Basically, they went beyond that. They said, we're not just going to fire you, David. We're ready to kill David. And it says, but David strengthened himself in the Lord. What an incredible picture for you and for me, that when we have tough times, when we have bad times, when we have rough days, it's not people that we need to run to, but it's the Lord that we need to run to find our strength. You'll never find a greater strength than strength in the Lord. Then David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. Abiathar brought it to him, and David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue this raiding party while I overtake them? I like how David, even in his tough times, he takes it to the Lord before he does something. He says, God, are you with me? Are you going before me? And the Lord replied, pursue them. You will certainly overtake them. And it says, and succeed in the rescue. If I'm not mistaken, in the King James Version, it says, and to recover all. God says to him, you're going to get everything. You're going to get it all back. David and the 600 men with him came to the Bezor Valley, where some stayed behind. 200 of them were too exhausted to cross the valley. They were too tired, probably from the travel and from weeping and hurting. But David and the other 400 continued the pursuit. They found an Egyptian in a field and brought him to David. They gave him water to drink and food to eat. Part of a cake of pressed figs and 2 cakes of raisins. He ate and was revived, for he had not eaten any food or drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. David asked, who do you belong to? Where do you come from? He said, I'm an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. So this was one of the peoples that were a part of the raiding party, the pirates, if you will. My master abandoned me when I became ill 3 days ago. We raided the Negev of the Kerethites, some territory belonging to Judah, and the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag. David asked him, can you lead me down to this raiding party? He answered, swear to me before God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I will take you down to them. He led David down, and there they were, scattered over the countryside, eating, drinking, and reveling because of the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from Judah. David fought them from dusk until evening of the next day, and none of them got away except 400 young men who rode off on camels and fled. David wiped them out. David recovered everything that the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nobody was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plunder or anything else they had taken. David brought everything back. He took all the flocks and herds, and his men drove them ahead of the other livestock, saying, this is David's plunder. Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him and who were left behind at the Bezor Valley. They came out to meet David and the men with him. As David and his men approached, he asked them how they were. But all the evil men and troublemakers among David's followers said, because they did not go out with us, we will not share with them the plunder we recovered. However, each man may take his wife and children and go. David replied, no, my brothers. You must not do that with what the Lord has given us. He has protected us and delivered into our hands the raiding party that came against us. Who will listen to what you say? The share of the man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as that of him who went down to the battle. All will share, and all will share alike. David made this a statute, an ordinance for Israel from that day to this. Basically, he said, look, all of us are sharing, those that guarded the supplies and those that went to battle. We all gave it our all. We're all sharing in the plunder. When David reached Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to the elders of Judah, who were his friends, saying, here's a gift for you from the plunder of the Lord's enemies. David sent it to those who were in Bethel, Ramoth Negev, and Jatir, to those in Aror, Sipmoth, Eshtemoa, and Rakal, to those in the towns of the Jerahmeelites and the Kenites, to those in Hormah, Borashan, Athak, and Hebron, and to those in all the other places where he and his men had roamed. Chapter 31, and we close out this book of the Bible. We see the death of Saul and of Jonathan. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. All three of Saul's sons died in this battle. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised Philistines will come and run me through and abuse me." Basically, he was shot with an arrow. He was going to die. And he knew that if the Philistines got him, they were going to torture him and torment him and make a mockery of him. But he said to his armor-bearer, "Kill me before they do." But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it, so Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. When the Israelites along the valley and those across the Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled. And the Philistines came and occupied them. The next day when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtaroth and fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men marched through the night to Bethshan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Bethshan and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. Then they took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. David had lost everything, but God was with him, and they pursued. Because of the Lord, they recovered everything. We see that David strengthened himself in the Lord, and that even when things looked bad, God was still with him. But the book closes with a tragic story of how not only Saul, but David's dear friend Jonathan and Saul's other children died in battle. And we see that in one day, out of the blue, anything and anyone that would have stood in David's way of becoming king dies. It's an interesting picture of how sometimes the timing of the Lord, we just don't expect it. We can't plan for it. We just have to trust it. And David had shown restraint all throughout this book. When he could have killed Saul, he didn't. But one day his enemies killed Saul. And this would begin 2 Samuel, where we will soon learn how David would become king and we'll get to experience the reign of King David. Be blessed today.